Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Paula Price. If you do not know me already, I will briefly introduce myself. I am a former practicing lawyer, now coach for lawyers. I spent about a dozen years practicing as a commercial litigator at a large national firm before transitioning about 5 years ago into the coaching practice that I have now. I work with lawyers one-to-one. I coach lawyers in groups. I do speaking for law firms and for professional organizations and organizations that support lawyers. And I also do consulting work with law firms. I also have a podcast called the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, where I talk about things like time management, transitions, confidence building. I also have the pleasure of bringing guests onto the podcast who share their experiences, stories, and insights, all of which are designed to help women lawyers and lawyers other than women lawyers to create a more joyful practice. And I'm so glad you have joined me for today's webinar. Today, we are going to be talking about hitting that refresh button middle of the year. So today's session is for you if what you have found is that 2023 has flown by and here we are in the middle of the year, and what you want is to hit the pause button and recalculate, see what has happened so far, what you've accomplished so far this year, and then look out to the end of the year and plan the rest of the year in a way that feels recalibrated, that feels sustainable, that feels calm and steady. This is perfect for you if you're busy, and I know you are busy, and so thank you for taking this time with me today. And you know you won't make time for this unless you commit to something like this. So welcome. This is exactly why I wanted to create this session, to create that window. And I will be leading you through a number of questions. You are going to be doing the majority of the work, and what you'll walk away with is a plan. And I'll turn to that in just a moment. This is for you if you want clarity as you start the summer. So as the summer unfolds, as we get closer, many of you will be taking breaks over the summer. And rather than feel like this is a reactive, responsive thing that is just happening, here we're going to take some time to plan in advance so that you feel more relaxed and confident that you can take that time away, knowing what it is that you're coming back to, knowing what your priorities are. Part of the objective here is to be able to maximize your downtime so you can really enjoy it, and ideally be able to prevent that overwhelm that can sometimes happen in September. So I know for myself and a number of my colleagues that the summer can dip, and then what happens in September is everybody comes back from their holidays, all the meetings are scheduled all at once, all the meetings and projects, and in your world, maybe it's court applications, it's closings, it's all the work that got pushed out of the summer because people were not available starts to pile up. And so that window from September to the end of December can be pretty intense, especially as in December, you're ramping up for the new year and those types of holidays. So what we're doing is we're getting ahead of all that by spending some time at the front end doing some planning. Other things you may be interested in is to let go of stale goals and hit refresh on projects that matter. So at the beginning of the year, you may have decided that there were certain things that you wanted to accomplish this year, and maybe things have shifted for you. And so you might want to let go of a few objectives that you had for the year and instead put something new in their place. You may want to be more proactive and less reactive in your practice. So you might find that you're feeling very much at the effect of what's going on around you. Now we're going to put yourself in the driver's seat. And then finally, you want sustainable, consistent growth. So today in particular, we've got an agenda. I will be, as I said, leading you through a number of questions, and you are going to take stock of where you are today. You will reassess what you want for the year, and you'll develop a plan and initiate a plan to get there. By the end of today, you will have your number one goal for 2023. You'll have your top 3 winning strategies. You'll also have your top 3 defeating strategies, ones that you want to monitor. And finally, you'll have your your first action step plan. So you'll have a plan and you'll have the first step planned. We've got 60 minutes together. I highly encourage you to have a pen and paper handy. If you're watching the recording of this webinar, and there will be a recording, I will share it with everyone who registered for today's session. So if you're watching the recording, you have the advantage of being able to press the pause button when we're going through questions and to write out your answers. If you are doing this live with me, I do encourage you to write down your answers if you can do that. If you are walking or you're out and that's not available to you, that's fine. But I think you will get more out of today's exercises if you're able to complete them. The other things that I would encourage if you're attending live is to use the chat and the Q&A to communicate with me. You can change your chat function to chat with everybody, or you can chat with just me. And for the Q&A, the questions are submitted anonymously. You can submit it anonymously. Only I will see the questions. So you're welcome to submit anonymously. You're welcome to submit with your name, but I will not be reading out names. I will just simply be addressing the questions as they come in. I will also mention that at the end of our session, I will be spending a few minutes talking about a group coaching and mastermind program that I will be offering beginning in July. And so if that's of interest to you, then please do stay on the line with me for that. And if it's not something that you're interested in, then you're welcome to log off before we dive into that. So with that, we are going to jump into today's session. There are 3 chapters. Chapter 1 is taking stock and reassessing your goals. Chapter 2 is uncovering your winning strategy. And chapter 3 is that action plan that we talked about earlier. So the best way for you to take stock is for you to answer questions. And so I see my job here as your coach and leader to take you through those questions. And so you will be doing most of the work here. And we're going to start out in this chapter 1 by taking stock of where you are. So please get your pen and paper handy, and we're going to start by you making a list of your accomplishments since the beginning of the year. So going back to January. Now, what I would invite you to write down, and please write as I'm speaking. You might want to make some headings as we go through the session, but just write out accomplishments since January. So what are some ideas that you might be writing down? Maybe you've made a transition into a new role. It may be that you were promoted. You may recently have been made a partner at your law firm. You may have started your own law firm. You may have attracted new clients to work with. You may have had a trial or a court application or multiple court applications where you were successful. You may have had some firsts, maybe some first files that you ran independently, maybe some bigger files. Maybe you've been developing a closer relationship with new clients. Maybe you've been presenting at continuing professional education sessions, courses. So think about all the things that you have accomplished so far. Maybe there are financial targets or hourly billing targets that you've been hitting. Maybe you have been taking on new opportunities. You may have made big decisions. Sometimes the accomplishment is that you've decided to go in a particular direction. So as I'm talking, I invite you to be writing out for yourself what your big accomplishments, or even small accomplishments, they all add up, have been since the beginning of the year. You might also celebrate or note brave moments. So if there have been moments this year where you've made difficult decisions, where you've had to take a stand, where you've done something that is courageous, put that down, because we really want to acknowledge all of the things that you're doing that you are proud of, that you can celebrate. You might also think about what other skills, whether it's courageous conversations. Is it time management? Have you found that you've been able to get a better handle on your practice? Maybe you've been working on streamlining your systems, maximizing your time. It may be that your leadership skills are evolving. You may have a larger team. You may be training other lawyers. You may be working more closely with your assistant or paralegals or clerks to help them help you build your practice. You may be developing a better relationship with yourself. You may find that sometimes it can be challenging. Sometimes there's a lot of negative self-talk that might come along in growing and pushing yourself in your practice. So maybe you found a more gentle or productive way to speak to yourself, and that is an accomplishment. It may be discipline, that you are finding that you're better able to stick to the plans that you set for yourself. It may be that you're making better health choices. So sometimes at the beginning of the year in particular, we set health goals for ourselves. Maybe you're adhering more closely to the health goals that you've set for yourself, and you feel good about that. So now that you've written out a number of the achievements that you have accomplished since the beginning of the year, I would invite you to look at the list that you have just written out and to celebrate yourself. So we're going to pause, we're going to reflect, and I would encourage you to look at that list. Think about what surprises you about that list. Maybe there's something on that list that you weren't anticipating at the beginning of the year. And what do you most want to celebrate? So now that we have spent some time, and I encourage you to spend as much time as you can acknowledging and celebrating your wins, that will in turn create a habit, a pattern for you of celebrating your wins, and that leads to more wins. So now that we have celebrated your wins, what we're going to do is we're going to turn the focus forward. So you've written out a number of your wins. Maybe you're thinking about some of the areas where you didn't achieve what you wanted to so far, and that's fine. We have time. And so what I'd invite you to do here is to write out a list of goals for yourself. Now, I've written here, identify 5 goals for 2023. So you are absolutely welcome to write out 5 goals. If there are more goals, then please write them down. The idea here is that you're creating a document that you can go back to after today's call is over. And so write it all out, put it on a piece of paper. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is your time. I'm guiding you here today, but ultimately my goal for you is for you to walk away with tangible, concrete goals for yourself, strategies, and an action plan. And so that's why it's so important for you to be writing these things down so that you've got that record that you can refer to. Sometimes when we're in this environment where we're being asked to answer these questions, we learn so much about ourselves, and we learn about goals that we had that we didn't even realize were so close to fruition, or that were so important to us. So identify the goals that you have for yourself. Now, some of the goals that you might identify, maybe it's a job transition. Sometimes it's thinking about, okay, here we are, we're approaching the summer. This isn't necessarily the time that I want to make a move, but I know that in the fall, I'm ready to move on. So maybe that is a goal that you have between now and the end of the year. It may be that you are looking to go out on your own, and so it's putting the pieces in place for you to start your own firm. Maybe you have your own firm and you want to grow it. Maybe you're on track for partnership and there's a step that you want to take in that direction. Maybe you have decided that a transition that you want to engage in is to leave the practice of law. This does happen in my coaching practice, where lawyers come to me and they're reconsidering whether lawyering is for them, or if they want to do it in a different capacity from what they've been doing. Maybe you can relate to this, or if they want to leave law altogether. So there's a whole spectrum of possibilities in terms of what your goal might be between now and the end of the year. You may have income goals. That might require generating more work. It may be that there are bonus targets and you're looking to increase your billable hours. You may be wanting to develop your client relationships, whether they're internal clients within a law firm, whether they're external clients. You may be wanting to build your profile within your firm, within your organization, within your community, within the legal profession. You may also want to expand your services. Sometimes you're in a certain practice area and you want to start adding new practice areas. You may also have lifestyle goals, right? We've talked about building up your income goals or increasing the number of hours you're working. It may be that your goal is actually the opposite, that you want less time working. That is also a goal that you might have for yourself. You might have goals in terms of practice management. Maybe it's the way that you're managing your time. Maybe you want your days to be more peaceful, more proactive, more planned. Maybe you want to hone your scheduling skills so that you can maximize the hours that you have within your day to optimize the work that you're producing. You might want to develop systems. You might want to be building up a team that can help you, that you can delegate to. You might be looking for support outside of work. So maybe you've got your work life dialed in, but you need additional support outside of the office in order for you to be present in both places. And then it may be that you've got more personal goals. Maybe it's that you're feeling like you want to build your confidence. Maybe you're feeling like you want to experience less stress in your day-to-day. So if you find that your practice is reactive, you may be wanting to approach your days with more calm, more authority. You may want to set better boundaries. So these are all ideas for goals that you may want to set for yourself between now and 2023. And what I hope each of you has now is a list of goals, whether it's 5 goals or more. And what we're going to do next is pick one of these goals. And I'm going to give you some guidance in terms of how to pick the goal for yourself. So there's a number of different ways we can think about goals. And I think the overarching principle that I'm going to recommend that you take when selecting the goal that you're going to pick for now and for today's exercises is to think of your goal from the perspective of this, that the goal is in itself of value, right? But the purpose of the goal is not necessarily the achievement of the goal itself. We do want to achieve the goal, but the purpose of the goal is not the achievement of the goal itself, but the person that you need to become in order to achieve that goal. So it's not just the goal, it's the person you become in achieving that goal. And there's a quote by Hal Elrod. He wrote a book called The Morning Miracles. He has a quote, I'm paraphrasing from that. And that's what I would invite you to think about when you look at the list of goals that you've set for yourself. Which of those goals requires from you the greatest transformation? Which of those goals will require you to stretch, to build in skills that you may not currently have? Some questions that you might also ask yourself when thinking about which goal is the one that is best for you is, again, to think about which will require the most of you. So there may be goals on your list where you think, well, that's a goal that I know I can achieve. I just have to do a little bit more of what I'm already doing and I'll hit that goal. Some of those goals are going to be a stretch goal and you're going to have to do things differently. So which goals are in that nature? When you look at the goals, which is the most exciting, right? If you look at the goals and some of them seem like they're kind of lukewarm, you don't have a strong connection to them, and other goals seem to jump off the page, which of those goals perhaps is a goal that you're going to choose for the rest of the year? And then finally, another measure that you might use is of all the goals that you've listed, which of those goals is going to have the greatest impact on your practice? So for each of you, I would encourage you now to pick a goal and then write on your piece of paper, by December 31st, 2023, I will have accomplished, and then insert your goal. I will have accomplished obtaining a new job. I will have accomplished creating a calm in my practice. I will have accomplished building a team to support me in my work. So you decide what that goal is, and you're going to want to write that down in your sentence. So the last question that we have on this page is, who will you need to become to achieve this goal? So this is where I would invite you to think about what kind of characteristics you will be required to have in order to achieve this goal. So I've got some ideas. Again, I would encourage you to write down what it is that you will need to do, what you will need to become, who you will need to become to achieve this goal. Number one is perhaps confident. You may need to be disciplined. You may need to be committed. You may need to be grounded. You may need to lead. So these are all ideas. And I would encourage you to identify 3 characteristics that you will need to embody in order to achieve the goal you have set for yourself. Now, I'm going to have one more slide when it comes to goals. So by now, you should have or will have identified a list of goals. From that list of goals, you will have selected one goal that is going to be your top goal for 2023. And you've also identified who you need to become or be or become to achieve that goal. Now, before we move on, I would also just like to share with you a tool that I use that I think is very helpful. I use it with my clients, and it's basically a way of taking a goal and giving it a framework so that your goal is more achievable for you. And it's called the Great Goal Framework, and it's great with an apostrophe. And each of these letters represents a feature or a part of the framework. And I've got a whole podcast episode, the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. You can find it on all the places where you listen to podcasts. Episode number 6 is all about great goals. It has a freebie framework attached to it. The reason I mention it is because I don't want to spend too much time on it today. I just want to very quickly go over what it means and to invite you to think about it in relation to your goal. And you can then take your goal and build it out using this framework. And if you'd like additional support, then you can go to that episode and listen to it. And that will give you some more ideas in terms of how to build out a goal using this type of framework. And this framework, I developed it using the SMART goal. You may have heard of SMART goals as a basis, but then incorporating different flavors to bring aspects of almost cognitive behavioral therapy, the relationship between how you think, feel, and act. I've incorporated that into the goal setting framework so that it really brings your goal to life. So the first question is, what is your goal? And you can focus on the result you want to create. When you look at SMART goals, the S starts for specific. And so you want to make your goal specific and measurable. I think that's what the M stands for in SMART. So you want a specific, measurable goal. So what result do you want to create? Here it might be, well, I have well-managed time. That might be a little bit vague. So you might have to get more specific. You might have to say, I have a calendar that I follow and I set my schedule and follow my schedule. You'll want to get as specific as you can. Again, we won't go into too much detail today, but that's the heading. So the goal will probably track something very close to what you wrote previously as your goal for the year. The reason for your goal is really key in terms of staying motivated and understanding the relevance of this goal in the big picture. So what is important to you about your goal? And here you might think about multiple reasons. You might go, your first reason might be, well, it's important, or I'm doing it because I said I would, but why? What is really driving that? What is important to you about that goal? The energy is important. It's what energy you want to bring to your goal. And so do you want to bring calm? Do you want to bring steadiness? Do you want to bring confidence? What is it that you need to feel in order for you to generate the result that you want from your goal? The action item, and we'll talk more about action in a few minutes, but what action steps are required for you to reach your goal? So for example, if your goal is to get a new job, your action steps might be something like create a list of possible jobs, create a list of people to talk to, create a list of places you can go to see where the jobs are, apply for jobs, have informational interviews, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see how there will be almost like bullet points that outline the framework for you to follow when you're trying to achieve your goal. And so again, here we don't have time, or I'm not reserving time in today's session to go through each of these steps, although we will spend time on action steps. The idea here is just to start thinking about, okay, what are the action steps? Time. 2 ways to look at this. Number one, well, 3 ways actually. When is the deadline? Here we've talked about the end of the year, so maybe that's your deadline. When do you want it by? How much time will you need for the project itself? So, if you're looking for a job, for example, you might decide how much time you want to allocate overall to the completion of that task. And then time also, I think, is really key when you're looking at it in terms of conversations or task-oriented behavior. How long is it going to take? So for example, when I prepare for webinars, I do great goals, and for time, I'll usually put time for preparing. So this morning, for example, I did a great goal, 2 hours to prepare and 60 minutes on the webinar. So I know in advance how long I'm spending on each task. If you're approaching a difficult conversation with somebody, it can be really helpful to say, okay, I'm going to prepare for that conversation. I'll give myself 20 minutes, and I know that I'm going to be spending 5 minutes on that call. It makes that call a lot more palatable when you know it's contained in time. That final piece of the great goal is the exclamation point. That's a wild card. So what hasn't been captured in this framework that you want to add. So again, what is the overall significance of this goal? Sometimes the exclamation point can really bring home the purpose of the goal. So here it may be that the goal that you've set requires a major transformation. It means that you're going to have to do things quite differently. It's a growth opportunity for you. Maybe that is the exclamation point. So having looked at this framework, I invite you to take the goal that you have set for yourself. And after our session, you can go into each of these categories, but I wanted to offer that as a tool that you can use going forward. Which brings us to chapter 2, which is your winning strategies. Now, before we dive into that, just wanted to give you an opportunity to ask questions. I don't see any questions in the Q&A box, and so I'll assume that everything's good, that you're all following along. If you have any questions or anything you'd like to share in the chat, please do so. But here, what we're going to do is we're going to find out what your winning strategies are. Now, the reality with strategies is that whether you are conscious of them or not, you are currently engaging in strategies that are helping you create the outcomes that you want. And you're also engaging in strategies that may be running counter to what it is that you are trying to achieve. And so the purpose of the exercise that we're going to do right now is to help you uncover your winning strategies and also to help you uncover the strategies that may be running counter to your goals, so that you can leverage these strategies in the attainment of your goal and also just in your general daily practice. So we're going to take the framework of looking at motivation and your growth and the sustainability of it by looking at the fuel sources that drive your work. I mentioned a few minutes ago the relationship between your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. So here we're really focusing on how you feel and how you act and how those are correlated to each other. So if we look at the sources I've listed here, I've listed passion, fear, and commitment. And so you can imagine yourself in your practice, you can imagine these different emotions and the effect that it has on the strategies that you use. So passion is what I think we all aspire to when we think about our work, when we think about our careers. We think, oh, wouldn't it be amazing to have work that I feel passionate about, right? We hear this often. And passion, if we're thinking about it as a fuel source, is kind of like sugar. And I'm going to use food analogies. It's almost like sugar. It's sweet. It's exciting. You crave it. It lifts you up. It sparks you into energy. And what it does is it gives you that sharp increase in energy, but it also has a sharp decline. So if we're relying on passion to get us through the day, yes, passion is going to get us so far, but then it's going to drop off. So it's not necessarily a reliable source of fuel when it comes to executing on your tasks. So you might look at the goal that you set for yourself. The end point is 6 months from now. And so is passion going to be what sustains you 3 months from now when you've done the initial bits, that initial sense of energy and drive, maybe that wanes a little bit. So how are you going to pick yourself up halfway through? The next fuel source that I've identified is fear. And I think that's a very common motivator for many of us, especially if you're deadline driven. I know when I was in practice, I used to feel sometimes like if it didn't have an urgent deadline, I just wouldn't be able to touch it. And I knew other lawyers that felt the same way. And so fear can be a great motivator. The deadlines, high stakes, the pressure, it really can have the effect of moving you into action. Stress does have a number of benefits when it comes to getting yourself in motion. But that being said, it comes at a cost. So fear I liken to caffeine, for example. It's great. I love tea. I love coffee. And I also know that if I rely exclusively on caffeine, yes, it'll give that short burst of energy, but it comes to an end as well. And sometimes the energy has a jittery component to it. It's not necessarily sustainable, and it's not always going to produce the results that you want. So here, I want you to think about fear and how that is a potential fuel source, again, but not one that we want to necessarily rely on all of the time for sustainable growth and sustainable success. So the third fuel source is commitment. And I would use interchangeably commitment and love. I think when you can love what you do and when you feel that sense of commitment, the two go hand in hand. So yes, we all want to love our work. And yet, even when you love your work, you may find there are times when you do not feel like doing the work, where you don't feel that sense of affection for the task that is ahead of you. And it's almost like if you have children, I've got children, I love my children. And sometimes mothering drives me crazy, all the odds and ends and the cooking and the cleaning and the laundry and all of it. Sometimes I think this is not something I feel a great deal of affection for, but I am committed. I am committed. And so that will pull me through. And the same is true of work. There may be the invoicing, the difficult conversations with clients. It may be the deadlines that get pushed up, the court dates that dissolve, the delegation tasks that go awry. There are going to be parts of your job that you do not love from a sense of affection, and yet they are part and parcel of something that you're very much committed to. So the commitment energy is like that whole balanced meal. It may not be as exciting as the passion. It might not induce that same level of energy as the fear, but it's a sustainable energy that will keep you going. And so what I'm encouraging you to think about is how you can use these 3 different fuel sources over the course of the next 6 months to achieve your goals. So the exercise that we're going to do now, again, this is one where you are going to be doing the work and I'm going to lead you through it. We're going to look at the strategies that you use when fueled by each of these sources. We're going to identify the positive strategies and the negative strategies for each of them. And we're going to start with passion. I think passion is a good place to start because that's where we all aspire to be passionate about our work. So starting with passion, you can write down passion on your paper and some of the feelings that might bring up for you: excitement, fun. It's almost like an adrenaline rush. So we're going to write down actions, and I encourage you to write positive and then list out, what do you do that is productive when you feel passionate? I'm going to give you some ideas. You might cast a grand vision. You might get other people involved in your project. You might take quick and or dramatic action. You might invest. You might say yes. You might generate a number of ideas. You might take bold moves. So these are all things that you might do when you feel inspired by passion. So write down what it is for you. Now we're going to move on to some of the negative things that you might do when you feel passion. So some of the things that I have identified as strategies that you might engage in when you're feeling passionate: you might overcommit. You might start really strong, but give up when the results do not come right away. You may underestimate the effort that is involved in a particular project. You might act without authorization or buy-in. You might be so excited about a project that you commit to it, you say yes, you invest resources, you get your team together, but somebody who needed to be involved in that decision-making process wasn't involved. And so that may be a challenge, something that sets you back. And you may overcommit yourself. I realize I wrote that one down twice. So think about what the negative strategies are that you use. And for each of us, the strategies will be different. And before we move on to fear, because that's the next one that we're going to address, we're going to go back to your positive strategies. And I'm going to invite you to circle the strategy that you think is the most productive of all those strategies. I'll tell you, I've done these exercises myself. I did them in preparation for our class. And I selected vision. I have a number of strategies that I engage in when I'm really passionate about something. And I think vision is probably the strongest one. When I'm really excited, in my mind's eye, I cast a vision into the future of what I'm trying to create, what I want to create. And that vision serves as a guide, as a beacon that helps me make decisions to move toward that goal. So for you, I'd invite you to think about what is it that is your winning strategy when it comes to passion. We'll do the same for your negative or your counterproductive strategies. Which one would you circle as being the least productive for you? For me, it was overcommit. That's the one that I'm most likely to lean on. I'm going to overcommit. I'm going to say yes to too many things. And that can have the effect of diluting my efforts and not really getting enough traction in any one direction. So for me, it's overcommit. And I'd invite you to think about which one applies to you. Now, moving on to fear. So you'll notice we're staying on the same slide in the presentation sequence, and we are moving on to fear. So again, what does it feel like when you have fear? Maybe you feel scarcity, you might feel rushed, you might feel reactive, you might feel pressure, you might have a sense of urgency, you might feel doubtful that it's ever going to work, you might feel confused, you might feel overwhelmed. These are all emotions that we can feel in that state of fear. And so what are some of the actions that you take? Again, we're going to start with the positive. Under stress, you might feel like you're really able to focus. You might be able to eliminate what is unnecessary. You might have a really good ability to put your head down and do the work. This is really common among my dear procrastinators. I sometimes am one of you. When you have that memo, for example, you've got a long lead time to write it, or it's a trial that's months away. You've got lots and lots of time until you don't. And so those last few minutes can really be productive. Tasks that are typically important but not urgent often fall into that category, and they become urgent and important, and all of a sudden you are head down. You might produce results really quickly, and you might move things forward. So these are all strategies that you might engage in when you feel pressure, when you feel fear, that can be really effective in getting things done and getting the ball rolling. There are also negatives. So now we're going to move into the negative strategies. You might rush and make mistakes. You might take action, but it's not efficient. You might think about how if you're in a hurry, you just do things, but you don't necessarily think about the sequencing of what you're doing. And so you might miss out on opportunities to create efficiencies, whether it's delegating, whether it's submitting an application that you know is going to require time for approval. You may also, you might cut corners because you have to. You might avoid getting started altogether. If you feel fear or dread, you might just simply avoid a particular task or a conversation. You might find that you get very laser focused. So you're seeing the trees, but not the forest. So again, we're going to go back and we're going to circle your tops in each of these categories. So for myself, when I did this exercise, the best strategy that I have, or at least that I currently think I have, because this can change over time, is to simplify. I think that is probably the most effective thing that happens for me when I feel that stress and pressure. I take what seems complex to me and I can break it down into simple tasks, and that allows me to execute. A close second to that, I think, would be that I simply implement. I'm very good at just jumping in and getting it done, and focus. Other sort of negative strategies for me, the biggest takeaway for me is that when I'm in a rush or when I feel pressure, I can miss the big picture. So I get so focused in on what I'm doing or that particular task that I might lose the sight of the forest from the trees. So I'd invite you to think about, for you, what your winning strategy is in this category and what your defeating strategy is. We're going to do one last exercise, and then we're going to move into the next part, the planning. So look at commitments. This is when you feel love, when you feel committed to a project. The energy that you might feel is purposeful. You might feel grounded. You might feel courageous, willing, determined, persistent, optimistic, confident, steady, and calm. So what are the action steps you take in this state of mind? It may be that you plan, execute, follow through. You may be willing to persevere through discomfort. You might make short-term sacrifices for the long-term goal. You may solve problems with the end in mind, with the relationship in mind as well, if it's affecting other people. You might take great care in the work that you are doing, and you may be very mindful of balancing the interests of different stakeholders. Actions that you take that may have negative consequences, you may, out of love, and here I think of those doting grandparents, you may smother, right? You may be so filled with love that you smother a particular project or person. You may try really hard to control the outcome. You may hang on too tightly. You may overlook problems that you need to address, and you may be unwilling to let go. So you might have projects that are stale, but you love them, but you need to let them go. So again, what you're going to want to do here is pick your top in each category. So for me, my strongest my strongest strategy under this category was plan, execute, and follow through. I find I am very diligent about that when I'm committed to the outcome. And then the negative one for me was over controlling. So trying so hard to get things a certain way that can actually be counterproductive. And what you'll end up with is a list. If you take all of your answers, it'll look something like this, where you have the fuel source, the strategy. And so I'd invite you to do that perhaps after our call today. And the way that you can put this into action is to think about when you're dealing with projects, maybe you're thinking about this goal that you've set for yourself, your overall strong strategy might be what you choose for commitment. So for me, it would be planning, executing, following through, and I'll need to keep my eye out for trying to over control. And if you find that you're unable to execute, you lack that motivation, you feel like you've hit a plateau, that's when you can turn to your other strategies. So I recommend starting with your commitment strategy. If that's not working, then you can leverage from your passion strategy. For me, that would be creating a vision. And if that's still not going to necessarily motivate you, look at your fear strategy. So here it might be to simplify. This also helps you to increase awareness when you are in any of these particular states. So you'll know that if you love a project, here's a strategy that you can use that is a winning strategy. You'll also know that if you feel really passionate about something, that you need to be mindful that you might, in my case, overcommit, or whatever you picked for yourself as being one to watch for. Or if you are in a situation where you have that sense of fear, where you're motivated by urgency or stress, you have that awareness of, okay, this is great because I know I'm going to be able to simplify and get this thing done, but I need to make sure that I'm not losing sight of the big picture here. So now we're moving into creating your plan. And here, again, going back to that great goal framework, these are the action steps. So you've been working really hard. I'm here with you, and you're almost done. So what we're going to do here is we're going to really focus in on the steps that are required for you to achieve your goal. So the first question here is, what are the steps required for you to achieve your goal? And I'd invite you here simply to list out all the steps that you can think of that are required. And I'm going to offer a way of triaging to identify your one step. So don't worry so much about that right now. Again, you're creating a resource that you can come back to when you have more time to identify how it is that you're going to achieve the goal. But use this time right now. We're committed to it, to writing out the steps that you need. Now, once you have written out a number of those steps, I would like you to consider what resources you have that will support you in achieving these steps. So it may be that it's time, right? That you can create time in order to get these goals underway. You may have people to support you. The project that you're thinking about might require a team. Who is it that you are able to rely on in order to accomplish this goal? Maybe it requires an investment financially. Maybe you need to invest in a product, or you need to invest in a team to help you reach your goal. Maybe you have materials already. Maybe it's you want to practice in a new area, and so you need to start reviewing some of the materials that you've already gathered in relation to that area. So I want you to just identify what you have already that can support you. Maybe it's outside of work. Maybe it's support that you have at home that will allow you to free up the time and the space that you need in order to achieve that goal. Next question, what obstacle stands in your way? Almost always the first obstacle is time, right? You just don't have the time to do it. That's why sessions like today are so valuable, and why I'm so glad you're here, because sometimes the first thing you need to do is just give yourself some time in order to think about your goal, in order to think about what needs to happen, and to make a plan for it to actually come to fruition. So what are the obstacles? Is it, we've looked at some of the resources that you have. Maybe what came to mind were some of the resources that you don't have. So you can put those here. Sometimes the obstacles are our own obstacles, right? It's the negative self-talk. It's the fear of failure. It's the doubt that it's ever going to work out. Maybe it's timelines, right? Maybe you want to do a certain thing, but there are registration requirements or things like that. So think about what obstacles stand in your way, and you're going to want to get really clear on those, because those obstacles ultimately become a roadmap for you. When you can figure out how to overcome those obstacles, things clear up for you. And what's so amazing is that what you can learn from obstacles is that obstacles tend to repeat themselves. So if you have an obstacle in one area, chances are it shows up in another area. And when you're able to resolve obstacles, you grow in a way that those no longer appear as obstacles for you. So that's a really interesting area to play. We're just going to note them here for today, but I'd like you to know what they are, because then you can start troubleshooting for how you're going to work around them. Now, I promised you that you would have your first action step, and that's what we're going to do here. We're going to identify one thing that you can do today that will move you forward. And so here, what I invite you to think about, and you can look at the rocks that are in the image on this slide. Stephen Covey talks about a big rock theory. And what that means is when you are setting priorities, which ultimately is what we're doing right now, we're going to prioritize one of those things. Stephen Covey talks about the big rock theory. And if you're going to fill a jar with rocks and gravel and stones, what you want to do is you want to start out by putting the big rocks in first. If you start out with gravel, these are all the little tiny detailed types of steps if you're thinking about it in terms of goals. If you put all of that gravel in, then you have a full container. You're not able to get those big rocks in. So where you want to start is with the big rocks. Those go in first. Then you follow up with the pebbles. Then you're going to add some sand. And then finally, if you want to be a super high achiever, and I know we all want to be super high achievers, we pour the water in, right? So we've got a full container. So what I'd invite you to think about here is to look at the steps that you outlined. So go back to that first question, look at all the different steps, and of all of those steps, which is the step that's going to lead you, which is going to create the most traction, get you closest to the goal that you've set for yourself. So what I love about this question is that sometimes what you'll see is that one of the items on your list already requires you to do something. So it may be that the goal is that you need to make a phone call to somebody and initiate a process, but before you do that, you need to get your ducks lined up. So I would invite you to think about what the biggest step is, and so put that as your goal. Or you might take a different approach, which is, I just want the easiest, most accessible step. That's going to start the momentum that I need in order to move forward. So you pick what your first step is going to be, and then you're going to write it down. So what I encourage you to do is to literally just copy what I put here. By X date, I will. And for me, it was, I think by July 15th, I will make a phone call to X. And I knew from my goal, which was that I needed to make a phone call, which required me to get a few things up in order. And so that's how I chose to do it. But again, for you, you're going to want to think about what works best for you. So I am going to assume that you've all had a chance now to write down by X date, I will, and that you've got your first step lined up. You've got a date by which to do it. And I am so pleased for all of you for doing this work and for getting the traction and for committing to yourself this time that you now have used to create some clarity. So now you will all have your top goal for 2023. You will know what your success strategies are. So you will have identified your top 3 success strategies. You will also know these 3 strategies that may be counterproductive that you can watch out for. And you've generated a list of action steps that you can take to get you toward your goal. And you've identified one in particular that you can use that will get you closer to your goals. So I'm very, very pleased with all of you. Thank you. Now, I mentioned that I am going to talk a little bit about a program that I'm offering. So I'm going to do that now. I'm also going to take questions. Again, I don't see any questions in the Q&A. If you have questions, then by all means, please do put them in there and I will turn to your questions. If you do not wish to stay for this part of the webinar, please don't feel any pressure. But if you do, then I just wanted to say a few words about it. First, I'm going to put a link in here there we go. This is the link I just put in is a link to the webpage that hosts this course. What I am offering is a 6-month program. It's a group coaching mastermind program for women lawyers. I am just wrapping up with my first ever group of women lawyers where we've done this program over the course of 6 months. So we will wrap up at the end of June. And it has been such an incredible experience to host these women. We have 8 altogether, and that is the plan for this year. Well, this half of the year as well, is to cap the group at 8 women. We meet over Zoom in a meeting format. So this is a webinar format. You can't, or I can't see you, you can see me. I wish I could see you. I love the engagement of the meeting format. And we meet twice a month. And the idea is that we cover an arc. There's a program, and I have set it up so that there is a theme for each of the months that we work together. And the themes I will share with you. We start with goals. So you've already gotten a head start because you've picked a goal for the rest of the year. And in the group, we pick a goal, and I invite my group each to do a great goal for their particular goal. And then we work on that goal. We use that goal as almost like as a way to practice the skills that we're developing over our 6 months together. So first we set that goal. That was January, so that would be July. And then the following month, we work on self-concept. Now, self-concept is really that exercise of figuring out how to become the person who is capable or who has achieved that goal that they have set for themselves. And that requires a lot of inner shifts. We get into self-concept, what that means, how we think about ourselves, how we relate to ourselves, how we speak to ourselves, because sometimes that inner dialogue can really hold us back. And so we think about different ways of engaging at a self-concept level to align ourselves with who we need to become to have the goal that we set for ourselves. And as you might imagine, the work that we're doing is in relation to a specific goal, and yet it's also applicable to other goals that you have within your practice. The third theme that we work on is obstacles. So we just talked about obstacles a moment ago, and there's this wonderful expression, the obstacle in the way is the way, or something similar to that. But it is so true. For each of us, our obstacles show up very differently. You'll know that by the things that you perceive as difficult and challenging in your practice. And when you look at your colleagues, some will have exactly the same challenges. Others will have completely different challenges. And so the beauty of obstacles is that it shows us where we have great opportunities to grow, because if we can learn how to overcome our obstacles, they're cleared, right? We get to move on to bigger and better obstacles. And so this is the focus of the 3rd month, is to look at obstacles. Then we move into another month, which is confidence, authority, and power. And we talk about building confidence. We talk about having authority, not authoritarian authority. You know, we have this idea sometimes of authority having almost like a dictator-like element to it. And it's not that at all. It's the authority of coming across as an expert, as a leader, and embodying that as a practitioner and thinking about how that impacts on our ability to perform. And again, we're thinking about it in terms of our goals, but also thinking about how that can have such a great impact in your practice. And then power, confidence, authority, and power. So what does it mean to be powerful within your practice? And so we spend a month with that as our focus. We talk about closing the gap. So if you imagine where you are now in relation to your level of confidence, your level of authority, your level of power, you look at where you are and where you want to be, and you imagine if you were to close that gap, exactly what it is that you would be accomplishing. There can be a real significance there. And so it's an opportunity for us to focus on that. We talk about building confidence, the 4 stages to building confidence. And so we spend our month in that. And then we have a 5th month, which is all about boundaries. And we had some amazing conversations about boundaries, because that is such a challenging area, especially in a legal practice where it's a service industry, where the expectations are really high, where we not only have obligations and commitments in a professional sense, but outside of our professional work. So boundaries is this wonderful place where we get to explore and talk about language that we use to set boundaries, the thinking that we have behind boundaries, how boundaries can serve us and others better. So great conversations about boundaries. And then finally, we are currently talking about sustainable growth. How do you use these different tools to create a practice where you continue to grow and that growth is sustainable? The way that we address each of these topics is 2 monthly calls. We held those calls, and I intend to do the same going forward on the second and fourth Wednesday of every month at noon Pacific time. The first month was usually a substantive call, so more of lesson work coming from me. And the second call was usually a short lesson, but really the focus there was on each of the group members coming to the call with their progress, with questions, and generating discussion. That was the substance and the theme of those second calls. In addition to the 6 months, I also created 2 courses to supplement based on questions that come up frequently in my coaching practice. One of them being transitions. It is a huge theme, and you do not need to be transitioning from job A to job B for a transitions training to be helpful. There's so much value in understanding what a transition is made of, because continually, even if you stay in the same job from now until the time that you retire, you're going to keep growing. You're going to keep hitting plateaus, and then you're going to come out of those plateaus and grow. And so transitioning is a wonderful skill to understand and develop. And then we have another call about time management. And I'm a time management, I don't know, is junkie the right word? I love all things time management. I could talk about it for hours and hours and hours, and I do talk about it for hours and hours. The idea here is to talk about time management in the way that will serve all of you. And I see there's a question in the Q&A. Let me just see what the question is. Okay, can you say what the 6 themes are again? I only caught 4. Absolutely. So the 6 themes are: number 1 is goal setting. Number 2 is self-concept. Number 3 is obstacles. Number 4 is confidence, authority, and power. Number 5 is boundaries. Number 6 is sustainable growth. And the 2 additional calls are transitions and time management. The other thing that is offered in the course is one-on-one sessions. And so I find sometimes there may be questions that you may want to address outside of the group. And so I offer with each of the course participants a 30-minute coaching call at the beginning or near the beginning of the course, and a second one near the end. And you're welcome to use that time for whatever is most important to you. And you can time those calls for whatever is the most relevant for you. The idea there is just to have that additional touch point and an extra infusion of support. And I can say that the relationships that I've built with the women in this course, they just feel amazing. And it feels really, because most of my work is one-on-one coaching, and I love one-on-one coaching, and I'm also available for that as well, if that resonates more strongly with you, if that's support that you're looking for. But the energy of a group, the dynamic is quite unique. And so it's quite remarkable from my perspective, and also from the perspective of the women in the group. I think they really appreciate being able to share in a group environment, to be able to see how each of them has something in common, to see where there are differences, to see how they can support each other. So there's a lot of, I think, quite magical things happen in that container. So if this is something that you are interested in, then by all means, the link is in the chat. Feel free to check it out. I will send you a link with the recording of today's webinar. I will also send the links to the course. And if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me to ask. The last thing I just wanted to mention is who typically signs up. And I realize typically is, it's hard to say because I've done the one round. So who do I think this course is really great for? I think sole practitioners particularly love having a community. If you're working independently, it can be really, really lovely to have a community that you can tap into for ideas and for support. If you're in transition, so if you're a new partner, or if you're a senior associate that is about to move into the position of partner, if you're already a partner and you've reached a point in your practice where you want to adapt how things are going, if you're about to make a career transition, you might want the support to help you navigate what that might look like. If you want practice management support, so you might find that the cadence of your time is a little bit all over the place. So you might want some help reining in your practice and finding ways to create more systems and more continuity. It's also really effective if what you find is you're really effective, but you find you're not really enjoying the experience of what you're doing. And what you are looking for is a way to learn how to love your work more, whether it's through the perspective that you have, whether it's setting boundaries, whether it's going back to time management, whether it's better time management, but it's also potentially the relationship you have with yourself. Sometimes it's the way that you're practicing is very much driven by stress and timelines. And so you want to make a shift in a direction that is more sustainable. And finally, you just want a community to tap into, to connect with. So these are all ways in which the group can support you. And again, if you have any questions, then I would invite you to reach out to me. I would be absolutely more than happy to discuss with you. So I notice we are now at the hour. I will stay on for any further questions, but I also want to be respectful of your time. And so with that, I will say thank you for joining me here today. I hope that each of you has created an action plan for yourself that will serve you moving forward. Thank you again for joining me here today. It has been such a pleasure, and I do hope to see you if you are interested in the group coaching and mastermind program. Again, if it's something you're interested in, please do let me know. I would absolutely love to have you. And that's all for now. So thank you again, and very best wishes for the summer and for the rest of the year. I hope all of you reach the goal that you set for yourself, and I would love to hear. I'd love to hear more if you would like to share that with me. So I will sign off and just wish you a great day, and thank you again for joining me here today. Thank you so much.